The loudest sound I heard that morning was not construction. It was silence where my driveway used to be. I remember the cool September air slipping through my bedroom window before sunrise, carrying the familiar scent of pine trees and damp grass that always drifted across my property after a clear night. My alarm had not gone off yet. I simply woke the way I often did, just before dawn, when the neighborhood still belonged to birds instead of lawn mowers. I pulled on an old flannel shirt, stepped into my work boots, grabbed my coffee mug, and headed toward the front porch expecting another ordinary morning. The wooden floorboards creaked beneath my feet exactly as they had every day since I bought the house 6 years earlier. Then I reached the front door. The mug nearly slipped from my hand. My entire house stood alone in the middle of what looked like a construction site. A freshly dug trench nearly 8 feet deep wrapped completely around my property, like someone had decided my home belonged on its own private island. The raw smell of freshly turned clay filled the cold air. Loose dirt formed uneven mounds beside the trench while fresh excavator tracks cut deep scars across my front yard. My mailbox leaned awkwardly toward the road, separated from my driveway by an empty gap no ordinary vehicle could cross. Even the concrete walkway leading to my porch ended abruptly at open air. I stood perfectly still, trying to convince myself I was somehow looking at the wrong house. But there was my old oak tree. There was my blue pickup parked in the detached garage. There was the weathered survey marker my father helped me install years ago. Everything was exactly where it belonged except the ground surrounding it. I slowly walked along the porch, staring down into the trench. The walls were cleanly cut, almost professional, stretching around every side of the property with surprising precision. Whoever had done this owned serious equipment and knew exactly where to dig. My first thought was a utility emergency. Maybe a broken water main or underground gas line. But there were no warning signs. No county vehicles. No utility trucks. No workers. Only complete silence. I reached for my phone and called the county public works office. The woman who answered politely searched every scheduled excavation project within 10 miles of my address. Nothing. I called the electric company. Nothing. Water district. Nothing. Gas provider. Nothing again. Each conversation ended with the same confused apology. As the morning sun climbed above the trees, my nearest neighbor, Mr. Lawson, stepped onto his porch holding binoculars. He stared at my house for several seconds before shaking his head. "Ethan," he shouted across the distance, "those machines were here around 3 this morning." I figured the county finally started some kind of drainage project. I thanked him, but his answer only deepened the mystery. Whoever arrived had worked through the middle of the night, without notifying anyone. A faint metallic glimmer caught my attention near the edge of the trench. Someone had hammered a temporary wooden stake into the dirt with a bright orange notice stapled across the front. I carefully read every word. According to the letter, the excavation was part of an emergency community infrastructure improvement authorized by the Willow Ridge Homeowners Association. My eyes stopped on the final sentence. "Thank you for your cooperation." I looked up from the paper and slowly smiled. Whoever wrote that notice had forgotten one very important detail about my property. I never trusted paperwork alone. I trusted cameras. I folded the orange notice and slipped it into my shirt pocket without another glance, because paper can claim almost anything. The ground cannot. Standing on my front porch, I studied the trench the same way I studied every survey site during the past 18 years. The slope angles were consistent. The excavator bucket had been approximately 30 inches wide. Whoever operated the machine knew how to cut a clean trench without collapsing the walls. That detail bothered me more than the trench itself. This was not vandalism done by impatient amateurs. Someone had hired experienced operators, and experienced operators usually asked one simple question before digging. Who owns the land? My name is Ethan Carter, and for nearly 2 decades I have owned a land surveying company serving counties across the state. My days are normally spent measuring property boundaries, documenting easements, locating forgotten monuments, and settling disputes before they become lawsuits. Most people think surveyors only carry tripods and measuring poles. What we really do is protect facts that have a habit of disappearing whenever money gets involved. That is probably why I bought this house. 6 years earlier, I fell in love with its quiet location on the edge of Willow Ridge. 2 acres of mature oak trees. A detached workshop large enough for my equipment trailers. enough distance from neighboring homes that I could finish paperwork on the back porch while listening to wind moving through pine branches instead of traffic. Peace was worth every dollar I paid. At first, the homeowners association barely noticed me. I kept the lawn trimmed, painted the house when it needed painting, and never gave anyone a reason to complain. The only thing that occasionally attracted attention was my surveying equipment parked beside the workshop. Bright orange tripods, GPS receivers, utility locators, and unmanned aerial mapping equipment looked unusual compared to perfectly polished family sport utility vehicles parked elsewhere in the neighborhood. Brenda Whitmore noticed almost immediately. She introduced herself during my second week after moving in, smiling politely while reminding me about community appearance standards. At first, I assumed she simply took pride in the neighborhood. Then the letters started arriving. One claimed my equipment trailer looked commercial. Another questioned temporary survey stakes stored behind my fence even though they were invisible from the street. Another suggested my work vehicles reduced surrounding property values despite every vehicle being legally parked on my own driveway. I responded the same way every time. Calmly, politely, with copies of county regulations, neighborhood covenants, and property surveys. Brenda never liked documents that disagreed with her opinions. Over the years, our conversations became shorter while her notices became longer. Eventually, I realized something important. She was not interested in solving problems. She wanted agreement. Fortunately, my profession taught me long ago that reality does not change simply because someone writes a different version on official letterhead. That lesson influenced another habit of mine. Surveying equipment costs a small fortune, and theft from construction sites happens more often than most people realize. Shortly after moving into the house, I installed a security system far beyond what the average homeowner needed. Small weatherproof cameras overlooked the driveway, the mailbox, the workshop, the oak tree beside the entrance, and every corner where expensive equipment might be stored. Most visitors never noticed them because I preferred quiet evidence over visible warnings. As the morning breeze carried the smell of fresh earth across my porch once again, I looked toward the workshop where tiny green indicator lights still blinked steadily beneath the eaves. Whatever happened outside my house during the night, those little cameras had not been asleep. By mid-morning, the neighborhood had fully awakened, but nobody crossed the trench. They stood on sidewalks, coffee mugs in hand, whispering to one another while pretending not to stare. Curiosity travels faster than facts in neighborhoods like Willow Ridge. Every passing minute brought another slow-moving vehicle, another neighbor lowering a window for a better look before driving away. I stayed on my porch, leaning against the railing, quietly watching people invent explanations. Around 10 o'clock, a white luxury sport utility vehicle rolled smoothly to the edge of my driveway and stopped exactly where the trench interrupted the pavement. The driver's door opened with practiced confidence. Brenda Whitmore stepped out wearing pressed khaki slacks, a pale blue blouse, and sunglasses that reflected the morning sun. She did not look surprised. She looked prepared. Even from 30 feet away, I recognized the same polished smile she wore whenever she handed someone another violation notice. She carefully avoided the loose dirt as she walked toward the edge of the trench, stopping just far enough away to avoid dirtying her expensive shoes. "Quite an unfortunate situation," she called across the gap with a voice sweet enough to fool someone meeting her for the first time. I folded my arms. "That depends on who created it." Her smile remained perfectly still. The association authorized emergency infrastructure work after receiving reports of drainage concerns. I glanced toward the dry ground surrounding my house. We had not received measurable rainfall in nearly 3 weeks. The grass crunched beneath my boots every morning. There was no drainage emergency because there had been no water to drain. "Interesting," I replied. "The county seems unaware of this emergency." She adjusted her sunglasses without missing a beat. "Contractors sometimes move faster than paperwork." That answer landed exactly where I expected it would. As a surveyor, I had worked beside contractors my entire career. Excavation crews rarely moved without permits because expensive equipment sitting on the wrong property could become an even more expensive legal problem. Brenda either believed I did not understand construction or hoped everyone listening from nearby porches did not. Before I could respond, another pickup arrived behind her carrying 2 men wearing reflective safety vests. They stepped out, looked at the trench, quietly exchanged confused glances, and immediately began photographing the excavation with their phones. Neither man carried company logos on his vest. Neither approached the equipment tracks. After a brief conversation with Brenda, they returned to their truck and drove away without saying a word to me. Their body language told a story far different from hers. They looked like people unexpectedly called to explain work they had never performed. Brenda watched them disappear around the corner before turning back toward me. "Everything will be resolved soon," she said. "I recommend remaining patient." Then she climbed back into her vehicle and drove away as calmly as she had arrived. The moment her sport utility vehicle disappeared beyond the trees, Mr. Lawson slowly walked along the opposite side of the trench carrying a folded newspaper beneath one arm. He lowered his voice before speaking. "Ethan, I was awake around 3 this morning. I saw Brenda standing out here with 2 excavators and a crew. She kept pointing toward your property while holding a flashlight." I thanked him without asking another question because I already knew something important. Brenda had just offered one explanation. My neighbor had quietly handed me another. Somewhere between those 2 stories sat the truth. And unlike conversations carried by memory, my security system had recorded the entire night 1 second at a time. I did not rush inside to watch the footage. That surprised even me. Most people think evidence should be open the moment it exists, but years of working boundary disputes taught me that the scene itself often reveals details a camera cannot. I spent the rest of the afternoon walking the perimeter of the trench from my side of the property, measuring distances with my laser range finder, and photographing every fresh tire impression before sunlight changed the shadows. The damp clay still held perfectly defined excavator tracks, each tread pattern pressed deep into the earth like fingerprints waiting to be identified. Near the southeast corner of my lot, I noticed something that immediately caught my attention. One of my original survey stakes had been pulled from the ground and tossed carelessly into a pile of loose dirt. That orange fiberglass marker had been installed after a certified boundary survey nearly 5 years earlier. Nobody digging responsibly would remove a property monument without documenting its original location. Whoever ordered this project wanted the boundary to disappear before the trench appeared. The realization settled quietly in my mind while a light breeze carried the smell of diesel fuel lingering beneath the scent of fresh soil. I followed the excavator tracks until they ended near the road where heavy equipment had clearly been loaded onto transport trailers before sunrise. Fresh hydraulic oil stains still shimmered on the asphalt. Nearby, bright orange utility flags stood in uneven lines across the roadside ditch. At first glance, they looked official. After kneeling beside them, I realized several were planted in random locations that ignored every standard utility marking color and spacing I had ever seen. They were props, not professional survey markings. Whoever placed them expected homeowners to recognize bright flags, not understand what the colors actually meant. Late that afternoon, another envelope arrived inside my mailbox. The return address carried the Willow Ridge Homeowners Association logo. Inside was a formal letter explaining that temporary excavation surrounding my property was necessary to support future neighborhood drainage improvements and thanking me in advance for my cooperation during construction. There was one problem. The letter referenced engineering recommendations, but included no project number, no county permit, no engineering firm, and no completion schedule. I read it twice before quietly placing it beside the orange notice already sitting on my kitchen table. 2 different documents, 2 different explanations. Neither one contained information any legitimate infrastructure project would normally provide. As evening settled over the neighborhood, construction noise never returned. No barricades appeared. No crews arrived to inspect the trench. No safety fencing surrounded the excavation despite its depth. If this truly had been an emergency public works project, someone would have remained responsible for securing the site overnight. Instead, everyone simply vanished after leaving me isolated inside my own property. Just before sunset, I climbed onto the flat roof of my workshop where I often tested surveying equipment before field projects. From that higher vantage point, the entire scene looked strangely deliberate. The trench formed an almost perfect rectangle around my land, while every neighboring yard remained untouched. Beyond the trees, I spotted Brenda's white sport utility vehicle slowly passing along the subdivision road. She reduced her speed for only a moment, looked toward my house, then continued driving without stopping. It felt less like someone checking construction progress and more like someone admiring completed work. I climbed back down the ladder, locked the workshop door behind me, and finally walked toward the small security room tucked beside my office. The soft hum of recording equipment filled the quiet space while tiny monitor lights blinked steadily in the darkness. Outside, the trench waited exactly where it had all day. Inside, 12 cameras had been waiting even longer. The security room smelled faintly of warm electronics and sawdust, a combination that had become strangely comforting over the years. 12 small monitors glowed softly across the wall while hard drives hummed beneath the desk like distant engines idling somewhere underground. I sat down, took one slow breath, and rolled the timeline back to 2:30 that morning. The first camera overlooking the driveway showed nothing except quiet darkness and a light breeze moving through the oak branches. Then, at exactly 2:57, headlights appeared at the end of the road. One pickup truck, then another. Within 3 minutes, 2 lowboy trailers carrying compact excavators slowly entered the frame. Their diesel engines rumbled quietly enough that anyone sleeping inside a closed house would never have noticed. I watched without speaking, taking handwritten notes instead of reacting. Camera 2, mounted near the mailbox, captured something even more interesting. Brenda Whitmore stepped out of her white sport utility vehicle wearing a reflective safety vest over her usual clothes. She carried a clipboard beneath one arm and pointed toward different sections of my property while speaking with the excavator operators. She looked completely comfortable, like someone supervising a project she believed belonged to her. There was no confusion, no hesitation. She clearly expected the work to happen exactly as planned. Camera 4 overlooking the workshop recorded one operator walking directly toward my original survey marker before bending down and pulling it from the ground. He handed the fiberglass stake to another worker, who casually tossed it into the loader bucket. A few minutes later, Brenda walked over, looked at the empty spot where the marker had stood for years, nodded once, and returned to the driveway. That single gesture explained more than an hour of conversation ever could. Camera 7, hidden beneath the porch roof, recorded the excavators beginning their work shortly after 3:15. Powerful hydraulic arms carved smooth sections of earth, while bright work lights illuminated the yard with almost surgical precision. Dirt piled neatly outside the trench instead of randomly scattered across the lawn. This was organized construction directed by someone following very specific instructions. Camera 9, mounted high inside the old oak tree, delivered the widest view of the entire property. From that angle, I could see Brenda repeatedly checking papers on her clipboard before signaling operators to continue digging around each corner of the house. At one point, one contractor appeared to stop and point toward my detached garage. Brenda walked over, studied something on the paper, then shook her head and redirected him away from the building. She was not merely watching. She was making decisions. The final sequence appeared just before sunrise. As the trench reached completion, one worker carried the bright orange notice toward my mailbox, while another placed temporary utility flags beside the road. Brenda personally inspected the finished excavation before everyone loaded the machines onto trailers and quietly disappeared. The entire operation lasted less than 3 hours. I leaned back in my chair and replayed several sections again, paying attention not to dramatic moments, but to details. License plates, company logos, timestamps, equipment serial numbers. Every camera angle overlapped another, creating one continuous timeline without missing minutes or unexplained gaps. The footage required no editing because the truth had already organized itself. I copied every recording onto separate encrypted drives, printed still images showing each critical moment, and carefully labeled every folder by time rather than by opinion. Outside, the trench remained exactly where they had left it. Inside, every second of its creation had just become impossible to deny. I slept only a few hours before sunrise because once you have the truth, patience becomes more valuable than speed. The easy choice would have been uploading every camera recording to the internet before breakfast. The smarter choice was making sure every piece of evidence could survive careful scrutiny. By 7 o'clock, I had already created 3 identical copies of the recordings, each stored on separate encrypted drives. Every video retained its original timestamps, untouched and unedited. Then I placed printed photographs beside my survey notes, matching every camera angle with the exact location where I had measured the trench the previous afternoon. The picture became remarkably clear. Every excavator track aligned with the recorded machine movements. Every removed survey marker matched the precise time shown on camera 4. Even the temporary utility flags appeared exactly where the footage showed workers placing them. Facts were beginning to reinforce one another without my help. After breakfast, I drove my utility terrain vehicle carefully across temporary wooden planks I had positioned over the narrowest section of the trench to reach the public road. My first stop was the county records office. Instead of filing a complaint, I requested certified copies of every permit, drainage application, right-of-way authorization, and excavation notice connected to my address during the previous 12 months. The records clerk recognized my name immediately because our surveying company frequently submitted boundary plats to the county. 20 minutes later, she returned carrying a thin folder. There was almost nothing inside. No excavation permit. No emergency drainage authorization. No approved engineering plan. No county inspection request. Only a single letter from the Willow Ridge Homeowners Association requesting general information about future stormwater improvements several months earlier. Nothing in that letter authorized construction. Nothing approved excavation. Nothing even mentioned my property. I thanked her, requested certified copies, and quietly placed them beside the growing stack of evidence in my briefcase. Before returning home, I visited 2 local equipment rental companies whose logos appeared briefly on one excavator visible in the security footage. One manager politely confirmed the machine had been rented through a private contractor but explained he could not discuss customer information without legal process. That answer was perfectly acceptable because I did not need speculation. I already possessed the equipment identification numbers captured by my cameras. Those numbers alone would eventually identify every machine involved. Late that afternoon, I received another envelope from the Homeowners Association inviting all residents to a special community meeting scheduled for the following Thursday evening. According to the agenda, Brenda planned to address recent neighborhood infrastructure improvements and discuss future development priorities. I smiled when I finished reading. She still believed she controlled the story. She had no reason to suspect that 12 quiet cameras had documented every decision from the first arriving truck to the final departing trailer. I spent the rest of the evening organizing everything into a simple chronological timeline. Camera recordings, survey measurements, county records, property plats, equipment photographs, official letters, neighbor statements. Every document supported the next one like carefully placed survey monuments marking an undisputed boundary. There were no dramatic conclusions written across the folders. Only dates, times, coordinates, and names. By the time darkness settled over the neighborhood once again, the trench outside my home no longer felt like a problem. It had become the center of a case built entirely by the people who created it, while my only contribution had been remembering something every surveyor eventually learns. Land tells the truth to anyone willing to measure it carefully, and cameras remember what people later wish they had never done. Thursday evening arrived with the crisp smell of fallen leaves drifting through Willow Ridge as porch lights flickered on one by one across the neighborhood. The community clubhouse parking lot filled faster than I had ever seen before. Pickup trucks, family sport utility vehicles, and golf carts lined every available space, while neighbors gathered outside trading theories about the mysterious trench surrounding my house. Some believed it had been a county mistake. Others insisted I had refused important drainage work. Rumors had multiplied all week, exactly as Brenda Whitmore expected. Rumors are useful when facts stay hidden. I parked quietly beneath a row of maple trees and carried a single black briefcase into the meeting room. It looked surprisingly ordinary considering everything it contained. Inside were certified county records, survey plats, printed photographs, property monuments, and several encrypted drives holding every second recorded by my security cameras. Nothing dramatic, nothing theatrical, just carefully organized evidence waiting for the appropriate moment. The clubhouse smelled of fresh coffee, polished wood, and recently cleaned carpet. Folding chairs filled nearly every corner, while a projector screen glowed softly behind the board members' table. Brenda stood near the front greeting residents with the same practiced smile she had worn every year during budget meetings and holiday events. She moved confidently through the crowd, shaking hands, thanking volunteers, and reassuring concerned homeowners that recent construction activities reflected responsible leadership focused on protecting neighborhood property values. If she noticed me entering the room, she gave no sign of it. I quietly chose a seat near the back where I could observe everyone without becoming part of the conversation. Years of surveying public hearings taught me that people reveal far more while believing nobody important is watching. Board members shuffled papers. Volunteers arranged bottled water along the front table. Several contractors I recognized from the camera footage entered together, avoiding eye contact with nearly everyone. Their uneasy expressions contrasted sharply with Brenda's confidence. At precisely 7 o'clock, she stepped behind the podium and welcomed everyone to the special meeting. Her opening remarks focused on community improvement, responsible planning, and temporary inconvenience required for long-term neighborhood success. Then she addressed the trench surrounding my property. She described it as an unfortunate misunderstanding caused by contractors responding to urgent drainage concerns identified during preliminary evaluations. According to her explanation, communication failures had created unnecessary confusion, but the Homeowners Association had acted responsibly throughout the process. I listened without interruption, occasionally making small notes inside a legal pad resting on my lap. Every sentence she spoke quietly drifted farther away from the timeline preserved inside my briefcase. She even suggested that inaccurate public speculation had unfairly damaged the reputation of hardworking volunteers dedicated to improving the neighborhood. Several audience members nodded politely, while others exchanged uncertain glances. Then Brenda invited questions from the floor. A few homeowners asked about completion dates. Another questioned the missing safety barriers surrounding the excavation. Brenda answered each inquiry smoothly, always returning to the same theme that professional contractors had managed every decision. She never mentioned personally visiting my property before sunrise. She never mentioned the removed survey marker. She never mentioned standing beside the excavators with a clipboard while directing where the trench should continue. Eventually, her eyes found me sitting quietly near the back of the room. She smiled politely before saying, "Mr. Carter, I understand this situation has been difficult for you. If you have concerns, now would be an appropriate time to share them." I slowly stood, picked up the black briefcase, and walked toward the front without saying a single word. The room became so quiet that I could hear the projector fan humming behind the screen. Brenda remained confident until I gently placed the briefcase on the table beside her, opened the lid, and revealed 12 neatly labeled evidence folders resting beside several external hard drives. For the first time since this entire story began, her smile disappeared before I spoke. I unlatched the briefcase and removed the first evidence folder without rushing because the truth rarely benefits from dramatic speeches. It benefits from clear organization. The room remained silent as I connected one of the encrypted drives to the projector resting beside the podium. A blue loading screen appeared for only a few seconds before the first security camera filled the wall behind Brenda. The timestamp in the upper corner read 2:57 in the morning. No music played. No narration explained what everyone was about to see. The only sounds were diesel engines idling softly in the darkness and leaves rustling through the oak trees surrounding my property. 2 excavators rolled slowly into view exactly as they had appeared 6 days earlier. Several people in the audience leaned forward in their chairs. Brenda remained perfectly still beside the podium. The next camera angle appeared automatically. It overlooked my mailbox from beneath the porch roof. Her white sport utility vehicle entered the frame, stopped beside the driveway, and she stepped out carrying the same clipboard I had watched repeatedly while reviewing the recordings at home. Nobody in the room spoke. Every eye shifted from the screen to Brenda and back again. The video continued without interruption. Camera 4 showed one operator removing my certified survey marker before handing it to another worker. Camera 7 captured Brenda pointing toward different sections of the property while excavator operators adjusted their digging path exactly where she indicated. Camera 9 displayed the entire excavation from above, clearly showing every machine movement synchronized with precise timestamps visible in every corner of the recording. There were no missing minutes, no unexplained edits. Every camera overlapped another, forming one continuous timeline from arrival to departure. I quietly placed certified county records onto the front table beside the projector. These are the official permit records requested directly from the county, I said calmly. There was no approved emergency excavation, no drainage authorization, no engineering permit for my property. A board member reached forward, examined the certified documents, then compared them with the video still frozen on the screen behind us. Another member quietly opened one of the evidence folders containing photographs of the removed survey marker alongside its documented location from the original certified boundary survey completed years earlier. The consistency between every piece of evidence required no explanation from me. It spoke for itself. One contractor seated near the side wall slowly lowered his head after recognizing himself in the recordings. Another quietly admitted that his company had been hired to perform excavation according to instructions provided on site. Nobody argued about the video because there was nothing to argue with. It simply existed. Brenda finally stepped toward the microphone and began explaining that everything had been misunderstood, that she believed preliminary planning discussions had already received the necessary approvals. Before she finished, one county planning official who had quietly entered the meeting several minutes earlier stood from the back row, carrying a thin document folder. He calmly identified himself and confirmed that the county had already reviewed the evidence package I submitted before the meeting. He explained that the excavation activity, permit records, and documented property markers would now become part of a formal administrative investigation. His voice remained professional and measured. No accusations, no raised voices. Just procedure. The room stayed completely silent except for the faint hum of the projector still displaying Brenda beside the excavators under the glow of portable work lights. For nearly a week, she had relied on conversations and assumptions. In less than 20 minutes, 12 quiet cameras replaced every rumor with a timeline that refused to change. 6 weeks later, the trench had completely disappeared beneath fresh topsoil and newly planted grass, leaving almost no visible sign that my property had ever been surrounded by 8 feet of open earth. Autumn rain had settled the ground naturally, and the first patches of green were already pushing through the soil where heavy equipment once stood. The county required the excavation to be restored according to an approved engineering plan supervised by independent inspectors, ensuring every boundary monument was reestablished exactly where certified surveys had originally placed them. Watching survey crews carefully reinstall those markers reminded me why my profession had always mattered. Property lines were never just measurements. They were promises recorded in steel, stone, and paper long before disagreements ever began. The administrative investigation continued quietly over the following month. County officials reviewed contractor records, permit requests, equipment rental agreements, and correspondence connected to the excavation. The evidence spoke with remarkable consistency because every document supported the camera recordings instead of contradicting them. Eventually, the Homeowners Association announced that Brenda Whitmore had stepped down from her position as president while the board adopted new procedures requiring independent legal review before any future construction affecting private property could even be discussed. The announcement occupied only a few paragraphs in the community newsletter, but its meaning reached much farther than the printed page. Several neighbors stopped by my porch during the following weeks carrying homemade pies, fresh vegetables from backyard gardens, or simply a cup of coffee and an apology for believing rumors before asking questions. I accepted every conversation with the same calm I had tried to maintain from the beginning. Most people were never the problem. They simply trusted the loudest voice until better information arrived. Mr. Lawson laughed one afternoon while standing beside the restored driveway. He looked toward the old oak tree where one of my smallest cameras remained tucked beneath a branch and said, "I guess those little things see more than the rest of us." I smiled because he was only partly right. Cameras record moments. People decide whether those moments matter. Inside my workshop, the 12-camera security system continued operating exactly as it always had. I replaced one weathered lens, cleaned several housings after the first autumn storm, and archived every recording connected to the investigation inside clearly labeled storage boxes beside old survey maps and engineering notebooks. I hoped I would never need those files again, but preserving accurate records had become second nature long before this entire situation unfolded. Some lessons become habits, and good habits quietly protect ordinary days. One cool Saturday morning, I carried my coffee onto the front porch just as sunlight filtered through the oak leaves, casting long shadows across the restored lawn. Songbirds had returned to the fence line, and the familiar scent of damp earth mixed with fresh-cut grass filled the crisp air. My pickup sat where it always belonged. My survey equipment waited inside the workshop. The neighborhood sounded peaceful again. Looking across the property, it became difficult to imagine that a few weeks earlier someone believed a trench could isolate a home and rewrite reality. They forgot something simple. Dirt can be moved. Signs can be replaced. Letters can be rewritten. Even stories can change depending on who tells them first. But carefully preserved evidence has a remarkable way of outlasting assumptions. Before heading inside, I glanced once more toward the tiny camera hidden beneath the porch roof. Its green indicator light blinked steadily, almost unnoticed against the morning shadows. Some people install cameras because they expect trouble. I installed mine because I trust memory less than facts. In the end, those quiet little lenses never argued with anyone, never raised their voices, and never demanded to be believed. They simply remembered every second until the truth finally had its turn to speak.